going to go big picture with Rod Farva here. He says, Ohio State fan here. What is the overall confidence in the state of Florida with the big three programs? Will we ever see them consistently ranked in the top 10 and competing for titles?
I think you'll see that this year. I mean, when you look at what Florida State returns compared to the rest of the nation, compared to their schedule, you would be kind of a hater if you didn't look at it and say that Florida State would at least at worst be considered one of the outside 6 or 8 that would be considered for the playoff, just based upon preseason accolades without games being played. Now, Florida, I think, has a more stable situation. Miami has a lot of pomp and circumstance, but they have good recruiting. But I think as it stands right now, Florida State is clearly above the 2 rivals. They, firmly beat one rival, and they're trending down. And the other one, they were able to beat with a potential number 1 overall pick and 9 guys that went to the combine. So, they only had 1 guy on their roster go to the combine. So I think it's a matter of time, and it helps when you're in a base that everybody recruits. And what we do know is that when Florida State's hot and winning, they can recruit anybody. You could just look at the people who they've had visit and look at what the 2024 class and the 2025 class are trending toward. And I think the same thing for Miami and Florida. The key is to getting Florida State back to what they were with Jimbo. I had a teammate who coached under Jimbo. He made a very good point. When Jimbo was here, who left the state that Jimbo really wanted? And I'd argue nobody. Like, Jimbo got what he wanted, and the guys who left were guys that he really didn't want. And I think another season of Florida State playing, especially if they're able to push toward the playoff, next year, rightfully so, you will be able to see it as a down year. But letting 9 and 10 be the standard, and then you keep recruiting. I think Mike Norvell, both in year 5, will have Florida State really rocking to where they need to be at.
Yeah, I think it'll take a little while. Like James is saying, there's some other programs in the state of Florida that are going to take a little bit. Florida State has the edge on both of these programs right now, but we'll see we'll see a lot of things. I think the biggest question mark for me is maybe Florida at the moment. I think it's just going to take a little bit more. It's going to take a little bit longer for Miami, but they'll get there. But on the other side of things, I think Florida is one of my question marks going through the career with Billy Napier. I don't know. It's very questionable. I'm not basing off of really last season as much, but I'm just watching the offseason go and looking at some things from camp. Just want to see how things develop for both of these programs. But yeah, Florida State's got the edge, and they're going to be the ones leading the charge for the state of Florida for at least a year or two. But Florida State's seen that. Florida State's been on the side where it's the other way around, and that's just kind of how the way things go. And Florida State had a really rough run for a long while. And, not saying that Florida State is now going to be fighting for playoff runs. They've still got a season to show us that they can beat good ranked teams. So we'll see. But for an Ohio State fan in here, congratulations. We're still got a ways to go here in the state of Florida.
Speaking of which, talking about more state of Florida Big 3 talk, we're coming up on 7 Eastern, and we'll be on the Miami channel there talking up the Canes. So I know these 3 are happy about that. So
we don't have Jason anymore to rip them apart, and there would have been at least 20 minutes of Miami talk in here. I will say there would have been at least 20 minutes, but haven't had that. This whole thing right here, the last little bit, it would have gone to 7 o'clock about Miami if Jason was here. So we did a little bit of Miami talk, but not a lot of bashing. So
you don't punch down. You punch up.
That's right. At this point now, you don't do that.
Yeah, and Jason does love, because Jason lives there. It's like a little bit different vitriol for him to be able to come at them. But I can't argue with guys who don't like every year for the last 4 years, we've seen the same first practice highlight where the quarterback drops back, tries to throw a simple slant, and the wide receiver falls down and drops it. Like I can't at this point it would be like me saying, "Oh, I dunked on my son." Good for me. Good for beating up a 9-year-old.
I think Miami's biggest issue to overcome is can they coach their way out of it? Can they develop their way out of it? Like what a lot of people don't want to talk about, even Miami fans, is how talented that team was that could not put together a win. And they put together 5 wins on teams that they should have beat, but did they beat anyone that they wasn't supposed to? No. So Miami's biggest question mark is are these actual coaches or are they just recruiters? And right now they've shown nothing but the ability to recruit. They haven't shown any developments to where you could say that kid's gotten here and gotten better. In some cases, you would say that some of the kids came out of high school and got worse. So, for Miami, they have to figure out how to develop talent. You have to get the best out of the best talent. They don't just walk on the field ready to play college football and then they have all the answers. And I'm with Logan on this. Florida, I have a bigger question mark because they also had an extreme amount of talent. Like James said, there was 9 that went to the combine. Anthony Richardson could potentially be the first overall pick, but you made him look less than average last year. You couldn't set him up to succeed. You didn't set up Florida to succeed. So I don't think Florida State has the question marks that either of the other two have. If there's one thing that you could say that Norvell and them can do, that's develop talent, bring up names that people didn't know beforehand. The question that you have with Norvell and his staff is, can they recruit at a high level? I think the 2024 class is going to be the first proof of that they can. So yeah, it's for me, not just being Florida State, but it's easy to sit here and look back and go, Florida State's head and shoulders above the other two. UCF is moving in the right trajectory, it looks like. Maybe they'll replace Miami in the Big Three.
So right at the end of your statement there, Chris, you hit it right where I am on this. And I've got an interesting vantage point because I pretty much cover all 3 to varying degrees. And I know you guys keep tabs on the other 2 as well as I do, if not better in a lot of ways. But I got to say, over the last 5 years, there's been a constant juggling of kind of power rankings between the 3. I would say within the typical year, depending on whether they're actually playing football because it's September through November, or it's, just been a signing class just come in December, or whatever the issues have been off the field. And then also more commitments coming in. It's been this constant, like, who's the flavor of the month? Who's hot? Does Florida have the advantage? And for a couple months, obviously Dan Mullen had 3 tremendous seasons in a row. So for those 3 years, they were the best team. And Florida State was down under Willie Taggart and early in Norvell's tenure. But Miami, they seem to spike in recruiting, and they've generally had better recruiting classes or close to Florida, and FSU's been down. This is the first sustained, like you just said, Chris, this is the first sustained since about mid last season when it showed that, Florida had a really nice early season win against Utah, and they had a couple decent wins against the likes of like a South Carolina. But other than that, they started to trend down mid-season on. Florida or Miami, like you just said, Chris. What was their best win last year? They were awful. Georgia Tech was their best. That was their best performance last year. Like nobody else they beat was any good at all. Well, including Georgia Tech. They didn't beat anyone with a pulse. So once Florida State got their act together, and certainly didn't play horrible in that 3-game losing streak, ran up against 3 pretty good teams. But came out of it, started winning games, and now that trend has continued. So we've got a good 6 months of Florida State clearly being the best program in this state, and that's the most I've seen, other than again Mullen and those 3 good seasons he put together in the rivalry and the power rankings of these 3 schools in state. It's interesting to watch, but Florida State's finally taken over, and I don't see any end in sight, at least right this second.
I think the biggest thing is going to be who's able to be consistent, and that goes with your coaches. When you think about the only time that Florida State has truly been down is after we had to do something that we had no experience doing, which is have a coaching search. We kind of failed at one, maybe rushed it too quick. Right now, per last year, it seems like we're doing okay. We need another year to be able to prove it. But when you have it was a Florida athletic director that said this. When you fire a coach early, all you do is set yourself up to fire the next coach early. So when you look at what Miami's consistently done since Coker's been gone, you brought Randy Shannon in, you brought Al in, you brought Mark Richt in, you brought Manny, and now you have Mario. And this isn't, I mean, I haven't been gone for 20 years. So, that's a lot of coaches in a short amount of time. So it's hard to be great if you keep missing. Same thing with Florida. Florida has hired, they've gone from Zook. They caught lightning with Urban. Urban was really, really good for a second with Zook's guys. Then his heart started hurting when his guys had to play and he had to leave. Then you brought in a bunch of guys that just haven't added up. So there's been turmoil. So a coach brings in a new philosophy, new offense. And even with Florida State, you had Jimbo pro style, big players. We're gonna chew up yards, but we're gonna play game management. Then you go to Taggart, who says, I want to run 120 plays in a game if I can. Completely different systems, completely different body types. And you have to recruit that. Then you also have to try to convert what's on your roster into that. Then you go to Mike Norvell, who's probably more middle of both of them. So now these players got to unlearn all these different things to really learn something else. And I think what really benefited Florida State is just being the team that doesn't have to keep replacing everybody. Look at what Florida and Miami have done this offseason. They had the same head coach, but they lost 60 to 70% of their coaching staff. Like they had to replace. It's not that. So again, without games being played, without even using trolls or anything like that, one has to say, based upon the data that's here, it's hard to not say that Florida State has control and probably will move forward and past those guys if they can't keep it up. Because not only did Miami and Florida lose coaches late in the process, they weren't able to get their first, second, or third choice in these coaching staffs as well.
James, are you making me have to stick up for Urban Meyer? Am I going to have to do that?
Urban's a great coach. Urban is
he brought in top 3 to 5 classes there.
Right.
But consistently.
What happened, and that goes to the point. Urban can recruit phenomenally. Urban in the SEC, though, had a season where he dipped to 8 wins again. And he lost that stronghold to Florida State. He realized he didn't have the elite quarterback play that he needed. And he got out. Here's why I say I joke about his heart. Because he went to go, Mark, you're super busy right now. He went to go work for y'all when you were at ESPN. How easy is that job being an analyst? Like when you travel on Thursday through Sunday. Like he basically became a college coach that just talked. Like he did nothing. He said he wanted to stop so he could focus on his heart, watch his daughter play volleyball, and spend more time with his family. For people who don't know, in the state of Florida, do you know what days volleyball plays their games? Tuesdays and Thursdays. Every Thursday, he was at ESPN's college football. Like covering that game. So you're missing more of your daughter's games than you did when you played. Than when you coached the Gainesville. But he comes back to Ohio State, does a great job. Urban, all jokes aside, if we could have figured it out, I might have forgiven Urban if he wanted to come to Florida State. But I'm also going to get these jokes off because of what he did to Jacksonville. We saw what he did here in Jacksonville, but I don't blame him as much as I blame Jacksonville for trying to force somebody to be good at what they're not.
Well, no doubt, and that's why I will never defend Urban Meyer off the field. It's all football. Anytime I stick up for him and what he's accomplished, because the on the field versus the off the field are two completely different resumes. No doubt about that.